This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by Breakfast at Dominique's, Hollywood's most prestigious coffee company. They've created a series of coffee blends to honor the legacies of many legendary stars, including Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, Boris Karloff, Mary Pickford, Ava Gardner, Harold Lloyd, Ella Fitzgerald, and Bozo the Clown. If you're looking for a great cup of coffee, give Breakfast at Dominique's a try. You can order any of these stars' coffees at hollywoodblends.com. So why not have a cup while you're watching our show and add a touch of Hollywood to your day?
Hello everyone, my name is Harvey Brownstone and today's program is all about one of Hollywood's most beloved and acclaimed leading men, George Brent. Our guest is his daughter Suzanne, who honors her father's career and legacy by enlightening film buffs about the prominent role her father played in the golden age of Hollywood. She's also an accomplished author of 3 wonderful novels. Suzanne, welcome to our show and thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Harvey. Thank you for asking me.
Your father started out on Broadway in the 20s and then started making movies in Hollywood in 1930. He started at 20th Century Fox, then he went to Universal and finally ended up at Warner Brothers. Did he have a hard time getting established as a movie star?
He did. He was quite an accomplished stage actor, as you mentioned earlier, in the 1920s. And like so many of that era, Cagney and Gable and all of them, they migrated west. And from what he told me, there was a lot of B Westerns going on in the early days. Rin Tin Tin, all of that. And he wasn't sure he was going to make it. And as you said, he went from one studio to the other. But when he arrived at Warner Brothers, actually, it's kind of a cute story. He did a movie called The Rich Are Always With Us. And Bette Davis was the first time he met her then. But he said it was funny. He went with a friend to give him support and the guy didn't show up and he did the audition. And so he got it. And The Rich Are Always With Us was one of the really big turning points. And that's, I think, at the beginning where he had his early friendship with Bette Davis, which of course extended for many, many, many years.
Your father co-starred with every female star of his generation. Barbara Stanwyck, Loretta Young, Bette Davis, Kay Francis, Ann Sheridan, Olivia de Havilland, Myrna Loy, the list goes on and on.
True.
What was it about George Brent that made him such a great leading man for the most popular and powerful actresses in Hollywood?
Well, I think it wasn't a competition. He was a professional. In fact, he had this incredible memory. He could memorize 25 pages in an hour and never look at it again. He and Bette Davis both had photogenic memories. And so I feel that part of that and his professionalism from the early stage work, he knew how to make it work for them. And he was a very easygoing, person. He wasn't a moody person or difficult in that way at all. And I think that, everybody talks about, of course, his relationship with Bette Davis, but he enjoyed Barbara Stanwyck. In fact, my parents were going to name me Barbara after her, and my mother went out with Suzanne. We never really know how all that happened. But anyway, he really enjoyed them, enjoyed their professionalism. And I think it's the lack of competitiveness and his professionalism that made it flow with all the ladies. And he liked the ladies.
Well, and they liked him.
They did.
Your father actually made 11 movies with Bette Davis, including some of my all-time favorites, Jezebel, Dark Victory, The Old Maid, and The Great Lie. What did he have to say about working with Bette Davis?
She was a lot of fun. They used to have a great sense of humor between them. Sometimes, though, she could be a little aggressive, and she had a reputation for fighting for what she wanted. And so he was not like that. So he kind of made the road as smooth as he could, but they enjoyed each other. And of course they dated, for a while.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, when they were making Dark Victory, if you look closely, you can see that part in the later part of Dark Victory when they go to Connecticut, before she dies. And she burns her hand and he kisses her hand and says, "Oh, what do we have here?" I think that was an ad lib. And, they really, really liked each other, respected each other, had a lot of fun. It was so many years later in 1981, an interesting turn of events. Not 81, excuse me, it was 1979. And Bette Davis, was traveling, as many of the actors do today. They still do a little bit. They'll take an arena and talk about their life and take questions. Well, she was doing that, and she came to the San Diego Civic Theater. So Dad decided he was going to go see her, and they hadn't seen each other in years. And so my brother and his girlfriend and a friend of mine, we took Dad, and they saw each other after not seeing each other for years. And then he left early, and we spent some time with her afterwards, which began our relationship with her. And this was probably, I would say, February, March of 79, and he passed away at the end of May. And she called us every week for a month, bless her heart, and said, "Are you okay? How is it going through his clothes?" She was so kind and compassionate, and people don't hear about this about her. And I always said there was much more to Bette Davis than the cigarette and what a dump that they used to characterize her. And she kind of took us under her wing. And we would stay in touch. And eventually in 81, my brother and I moved to Los Angeles. He was going to pursue some acting. And of course, she invited us to her house for a cocktail party. Now, I mean, that's an invitation you would never turn down. Black cocktail dress, gardenias in the hair, the whole thing. And she was so funny. She made everybody wear a name tag, including herself. Now, I mean, really, we wouldn't know who she was. And we went to her home for dinner. And this, of course, is where we met her assistant, Catherine Cermak, who has remained friends. We consider her family. And I've known her since 1981, as you have worked with her as well. But she became part of our life, and she and I would communicate over the holidays and stay in touch.
I want to ask you, do you think Bette Davis was your father's favorite leading lady?
Yes, but right next to Barbara Stanwyck. He always said Barbara was so professional, and those two, I think, were his favorite, though he enjoyed them all, as we have said before. But yes, I would say that she was one of his absolute favorites.
To my knowledge, your father was never nominated for an Oscar or a Golden Globe. Do you think he was underrated as an actor, given some of the memorable roles that he played?
Good question, because I think he made it look so easy that sometimes people thought maybe he was a little boring. And I hate to use the word boring because I don't think that was the case with the characters he played. But maybe he made it look so easy. And in those days, they used a lot with dialogue and characters rather than today, when we tend to use special effects and drama and sex and four-letter words. And we tend to go in a different direction, where I think in his day it was more the blending of characters and making the storyline interesting. But he did make it look easy. And I think maybe that might come from his theater background, where you do not over-express, where in the film you can be more expressive. I don't know if you've ever noticed that.
I always thought that the sign of a good actor is when you don't see them acting. You can't tell that they are acting.
There's no seam between the actor and the character. Exactly.
And I think your father was a master of that.
He was. Well, in astrology, Pisces is the sign of the actor. And he was a triple: his sun, his moon, and his Mercury, the way he thinks, which gave him that photogenic memory and that face that photographed so well, because the moon is your face. And I think it was for him like slipping into a pair of comfortable gloves, and he just went forward in each character.
Now, many people don't know this about George Brent, that he was a pilot. And during World War II, he was a civilian flight instructor and then became a pilot in the U.S. Coast Guard till the end of the war. Did he ever talk about those experiences?
Very little. There was a private side to him. But yes, he did tell us he flew. He loved flying. And he flew in The Great Lie, with Bette Davis. When he has a scene where he comes in on the plane, it was his plane and he was flying it. But he enjoyed it very much. I think it gave him a little escape. Flying racehorses and sailing yachts, that was his thing. He loved all that.
Now, Suzanne, by the time you were born in 1950, your father's movie career was slowing down and he was working mostly in television. Why do you think that happened? He was still in the prime of his life and he could have kept making movies.
He could have, I think, several things. He was in a time from the great film era to television, just like the silence to talkies, and many actors would fall by the wayside. I also feel sincerely that he wanted a family, and I feel that he wanted to get with horses. He loved horses. He was gifted with it. And so when I was growing up, my brother and I, we lived out in the San Fernando Valley at Royal Oaks Farm, and he wanted to race them and breed them. And the first thing I learned to do was to ride a horse. But I think he wanted that. He wanted to get away from the craziness of Hollywood. I think he used to tell me he loved it in his day. It was very social and fun. And he did make one last film in 1978, I think. And when he went back to Warner Brothers, my brother went with him. He said, I don't think I could handle the pressure today. It's a very intense industry. It's evolved in a different way, I think, than it was in the early days. But I do think that was his choice, to go with the family and to have the horses, which we had for quite a few years. We lived in the San Fernando Valley, then we moved to Rancho Santa Fe near San Diego and continued there.
Who were some of your father's good friends in the industry?
Well, his double, Saul Gorse, he loved him. We knew him quite well. But the people he knew when I was growing up is all I can really share with you. And Milburn Stone from Gunsmoke, George Lewis, who played Zorro's father in that series, Jimmy Cagney, loved Cagney. In fact, he and Cagney got together. I wasn't there, unfortunately, but they had sort of a reunion. And I think that he knew them all, but as he reduced his acting and went more into the family, he kind of drew back a little from that. And I think his friends became more people that raced horses. And, I think he separated a little from that.
Did your father have a favorite film?
I think Dark Victory, probably. But one that I love very much, The Rains Came, which I felt was very ahead of its time with the special effects, which we take for granted today. I think that he enjoyed many of them, but I'd have to say Dark Victory, probably.
That's interesting because that was by far Bette Davis's favorite film.
Well, I think as I said, I think they really enjoyed working together. One other film he did called Spiral Staircase, which was a thriller. I was amazed because, Dad always got the girl and now he's the bad guy. I thought, how did that happen? But he enjoyed that very much because it was a little bit off of his main, menu that he used to work from, you might say.
So now, Suzanne, let's talk about you. You had a very unconventional upbringing. You started out on a horse ranch in the San Fernando Valley. Then you moved to Rancho Santa Fe, and you got very involved with showing horses. And then as a teenager, you went to school in Switzerland. And then when you were 16, your family moved to Dublin, Ireland. What an incredible youth you've had.
Well, it was exciting. It was like it was jam-packed. I loved it when we moved to San Diego. We had a beautiful farm there called Vista Hermosa, and that's Spanish for beautiful view. It was our Gone with the Wind, big white house with the green shutters set up on a hill, and the hill was banked in lavender ice plant, and you would drive through these acacia trees that bloomed yellow. I mean, it was like out of the movies. It was. And our dad was a great believer, go big or go home. So our whole life was this, wow. And at that point, I actually started showing horses. I was, had my classes and learned how to do that. And he bought me a horse, and only my dad could have called this. And the horse was called Mr. Wonderful. And it was just something Dad would do. It was big, and I loved it. And then we started traveling. I went to school in San Francisco briefly for a year, where my mom's family was from. And then it was Switzerland for 2 years. And I went to school at Chateau Montchoisy in Lausanne, and my brother was in Vevey at a boys' school there. When I went to Europe, I thought I was coming home. And it's not that I don't love California, I do, but there was something about the history and the uniqueness of all the different cultures that I just loved, and a certain sophistication that I liked, and the castles and the architecture, all of that. And then they brought us home for a year, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Mom and Dad, it was in October of 65, and they said, "We want to talk to you." And I thought, oh, here we go. I wonder what's going to happen. I walk into the living room, and there's this huge poster of Bunratty Castle in Ireland. It was sitting over the fireplace. And Mom and Dad said, "Well, we want to tell you we've made a decision. We're moving to live in Ireland."
Wow.
I was over the moon because I love to travel. I'm an adventure girl. I loved all this. My brother, perhaps a little less. He was younger and he was going to miss the beach and the surfing and all that stuff, you know. And we went to live in Ireland. We had a home in Dublin called Arana. Beautiful, lovely place. I went to school in Waterford, where they have the Crystal, and Barry in north of Dublin and Castle Park. I used to call it the Downton Abbey years, because my friends that I went to school with had estates with ruins of castles on them. And honestly, when I remember they came out with Downton Abbey, I said they could have called me. They didn't even have to pay me. I would have said, "Okay, you work from the outside in with the silver, and you do this and you do that." I just loved it. I mean, it was really a romantic time too, because I was about 16 or 17. So it sort of shaped a little bit of me, and I would have stayed, but I realized too, for my parents, it was just too big of a leap at that point in their life. And I mean, when we left, I mean, we sold everything here. We got rid of the station wagon and the Cadillac. Dad decided he wanted a Rolls. Like I said, go big or go home. And they said it was just a little too late. We flew the horses over to run at the Curragh. It was just wild. But in a couple of years, they said they wanted to come back to California. And so everything came back. And at that point, I started working my first job, you know, so I was out of school at that point. Shortly after that, our mother became ill, and she passed away in 1974. And then Dad remarried briefly. Bless his heart. You know, there was a lady he met, he knew years ago, but it was a little late in his life for that, and it didn't work out. So they decided to get a divorce. And before he met her, he ran into Janie Powell, who he made luxury liner with. I went to see Janie in a play. She was in San Diego, and went back to say hello to her. And they got together and went out a bit. But Janie, I think, was much more active and busy, and Dad was kind of slower moving at that point, and it didn't come to pass. I think Jane is still with us. I think she's back in Connecticut. But he passed away in 1979, went to bed one night, bless him, and didn't suffer or anything. And that was that. But we miss him. You know, but it inspired me with my writing. That's where it all comes from. And when I was 16, just before we went to Ireland, I knew I wanted to be a writer, but this little pesky thing called life kind of got in the way, and all the adventures and all this. And so it wouldn't be till later in my life, I would say in the 90s, that I really thought, you know, I need to do this. And that's when I wrote Masquerade, which is a thriller. It's set in LA. Los Angeles is an interesting place. You know, I think they tell us that the Bermuda Triangle's in Florida. I'm not so sure. I think it might be LA, because you never see people again, or their lives are so changed. They just, you know what I mean? LA is like that. So I wrote the thriller, and then I wanted to write books, a little something for everybody, I think, was what I was trying to do. So we have the thriller. Then I wrote The Silver Screen, which is really close to my heart. I dedicated it to Dad, Bette Davis, and John Huston. I didn't mention him earlier, but he was also a very good friend of Dad's, and the man that got us to go to Ireland, because, you know, he had St. Clarence over there. But I wanted to write something about old Hollywood that was a page turner. So my character gets caught up in everything and goes back there and changes their life. But I wanted to make it as realistic as I could. And many people have said you almost believe it could happen. it was so much fun writing it. And I'm not one of those tortured writers. I go on an adventure with my characters, and I hope my readers do the same when they read my pages. And my last one, Glend Drake. So we have the thriller, the time travel, and this one is my vampire story, but it's not a Sydney Snipes blood and guts thing. It's star-crossed lovers and in a parallel existence in Loch Ness, Scotland, and how they make their way to break a curse that's from ancient times from the Druids. A lot of fun, fast-paced, beautiful location. And then, of course, I've blocked out a book for Dad, but I have to get there. And I'm sure we'll talk about that too at another time.
Well, starting with the first book, I know you've given us a brief review of all three of them. I just want to ask you a little bit more. The first book, entitled Masquerade, is full of mystery, suspense, and romance. It's about a mysterious woman who's obsessed with obtaining a rare ancient Egyptian mask for its magical powers. There's a huge plot twist, which I love. How do you think up these intricate plots?
Well, my metaphysical background, I'd have to say, I've studied so many interesting subjects, and there were some things that I had heard about that actually happened. And I thought, oh, this might make it an interesting story. But the character turns everybody's life upside down with love, money, sex, magic, whatever she can do to get to this thing. But nobody really sees her how she is. And that's what I wanted. I wanted them to wonder what in the world's going to happen. You want to get them interested in it and keep them there till you get to the end. But I would have to say my metaphysical background, my interest in ancient Egypt, all of that type of stuff.
Now, your second novel, The Silver Screen, it's a real Hollywood suspense thriller that immerses the reader back to the golden age of Hollywood. I absolutely loved it. There's time travel, there's Howard Hughes, there's an intriguing studio head. If this book had been made into a movie when your father was in his prime, which character would you have liked to see him play?
Well, we mentioned him in the book. Maybe he could do Jack Baldwin, which is the main character. When I wrote this, to be honest with you, I thought George Clooney would be fabulous for this because he's got the demeanor for it. He would be ideal. The leading ladies have changed, but I would love to have Emma Stone. I think she'd be fabulous as Kate because the character's feisty, But I would have to say maybe that he would have enjoyed it. We do mention him briefly, and I try to take the reader into situations that actually existed. But, if this really happened, the person who gets stuck in 1939 is not going to have lunch with Bette Davis. What are they going to run into? What would be real, And she ends up going to a party by Sonia Henney, who happens to be dating Tyrone Power at the time. And there's a wonderful scene there, which doesn't give the story away, but she meets Hedda Hopper and she meets Humphrey Bogart, and what somebody would feel like if they could actually do that. What would happen? So it was fun, but I think Dad would have liked it. I do.
Oh, I think he would have loved it for sure. Your third novel is entitled Glend Drake, and it takes place at a castle in Scotland, and it's full of Celtic folklore and magic and heroes and villains and, of course, romance. And there's even a vampire stemming from an ancient curse. Is there any talk of any of your books being made into movies?
Well, the people that read them are leaving comments that they say, gee, this would be a great film. I felt that Glend Drake might be a good Netflix these days. Whereas, of course, Silver Screen, I'd love a major motion picture for that. So we have to go to the premiere at Grauman's Chinese or have some fun with that, and same for Masquerade. I have to get screenplays done. The only one that has a screenplay done is Masquerade. But there seems to be an interest in comments. So who knows? Maybe somebody will see this and say, let's read the book and see what she has to offer. But I hope so. I think I'm such a visual person, and I really wanted to do the work that would give people pleasure in their daily life. Do you know what I mean? Life is tough. You get up every day and you go out the door and you just don't know what's going to fall out of the sky. And I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have people go away through the pages of my work for a while and have an adventure and forget their troubles? And I thought then I would have accomplished something in my life that I thought might be worthwhile. I get wonderful emails from Dad's fans. They come to my website, SuzanneBrent.com, and they read it and they comment about the movies and this, that, and other. There was a man that sent me a wonderful email that said, like your father who gave us hours of pleasure with his films, so do you with your books. And I nearly came to tears because I thought, that's it. That's what I want to do, because I like people. I'm a people person, and I thought maybe before the show's over, I can get a few books out there, So, yes.
Would you be willing to write the screenplays yourself?
No, I'm not skilled in that area, but I do have someone that can do it. I'm hoping. And I do have a friend in Los Angeles, my good friend Richard Reams, who has been very supportive of my writing, particularly with Masquerade. It's a timing thing in this industry. You could have the next Gone with the Wind, but if it's not the right time, and I tried to promote Masquerade many, many years ago, almost 20 years ago. And Richard said to me, he said, I think your timing's off on this because you need so many special effects. And today, 20 years later, they use computers for everything, and it's at a fraction of the cost. So the studios can say, okay, let's give this a shot.
I'd love to see Silver Screen made into a movie because there is an interest in the golden age of Hollywood. It's a big, big part of our show. There's
Yeah.
been some Netflix miniseries. There was one by Ryan Murphy called Hollywood.
Well, I think it would make a good picture. Now, Masquerade, we had even talked about making it a miniseries, breaking up the story for a couple of weeks and doing something like that. But for Silver Screen, I mean, my dream would be to have somebody like Ron Howard or somebody like that. And of course, I'm like my dad, I go big. But I thought, no, because they know about the era. They appreciate and value it. They would be able to frame it in such a way that I think the public might be ready for something that isn't so, I don't know. We have so many films today that are not so uplifting and they're a little on the dark side. And, I thought something that would really, you go to the movies, you have a good experience, and there it is. You know what I mean?
I think everybody's ready for that, Suzanne.
I hope so. I hope so.
So what's next for Suzanne Brent? Can you give us a little hint about what your next book is about?
Certainly. I wanted to do, again, I like to do a little something different each time, something for everybody, hopefully. It's a period piece that starts in Boston around 1912 after the sinking of the Titanic, and a young lady who grows up a bit of a neglected girl, and her grandmother takes her to Paris in her 20s and she blooms, and the book is called Adrian Collins, and she meets somebody in Paris that changes her life and she becomes a famous artist. But the behind the story is about angels among us, about people that come into our lives 5 minutes, maybe 5 years, we never know, and they affect our lives in a wonderful way. And the fellow that does this is going to get into metaphysical things. I don't ever know if you've ever heard of what a walk-in is, but a walk-in is a soul that comes in to help another soul that maybe is so distraught they don't want to live anymore, and they come in and they carry on. And that's a little bit about this. And he wants to make a difference because he messed up his life, basically. And so they choose the girl and what happens and how it goes and everything. It'll be a long story, but I think it'll be good. I hope.
How long does it take you to write a book like that?
Well, if I'm moving along, about a year, maybe less. When I wrote Silver Screen, that just flew out of me. So I thought, okay, about a year, maybe year and a half. And, as an independent author, it falls to me for everything. I have to have a team. And so I have my website designer and she hosts that. I have my cover design fellow and he takes care of that. I have a typing service that knows how to set it up for the books. And then I have my publishing company, which is in Ohio, that once we get everything together, it goes to them. And then you can decide, do we have ebook? Do we have soft cover? Do we have hardcover? Do we do audio? It goes up a bit in costs along the way. So I have to kind of spread it out a little bit. But I have Adrian Collins, I have Dad's book, and I have 3 more fictionals lined up. It's just, if I had another 24 hours of the day, maybe I could do it faster, but I like to think things come together at the right time. I'm always having faith in that.
Suzanne, I know that you've studied metaphysics, astrology, numerology, and you're a life coach. I'm really intrigued by your life journey. Have you explored your past lives?
I have. In my early days, I took a course for 6 months and I loved it. This is what got me into time travel and all of that. I worked with a woman called Ethel Crow, funny name. And I used to say working with past lives was more fun than taking the Concorde, because you would go back in time and you would go to these lives. And when you trust the person, the hypnotherapist that regresses you, you can really, I mean, there were lifetimes when I could smell the earth and I could feel the heaviness of the fabrics that I was wearing at the time. But it also added a huge dimension to me. Why am I like this? Why do people react to me this way? Why is my life in this direction? And I think it adds a lot of dimension to people. You don't want to get caught in the past, but I think it helps you understand a lot about your life. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
So when you meet people that you've never known before, can you read certain things about them that would not necessarily be apparent to someone who doesn't have your knowledge and gift?
Well, you're talking more about a medium. I'm not a medium. I work with astrology and numerology. Those are my tools. Now, I can pick up things about people when I meet them, like maybe I need to get out of the room. This is not a good thing. Or I feel like I've known you forever. And I sense things about a lot of stuff. I've always been like that. My father was very intuitive. My mother was we were a very mystical family, and they were very open to all of this. And I dream about things before they happen. And I really believe in each life, we have guides and teachers, and different ones. Maybe you're studying to go to university and you have an ancient Mandarin, or maybe you're going camping and you have an American Indian, or somebody who's agreed to help you through your life. Because I don't believe we're ever alone. I think we have somebody from birth to death in different times in our life. It's been a gift. I trust it. I've learned to trust it. And that has helped me with my writing. I trust what comes through. I don't get crazy and rewrite it 50 times. I know, I'll polish it and make it tighter, but I know where to open a chapter, when to close a chapter. I feel like I've got a group on the other side that's helping me.
Do you feel your parents around you?
Sometimes. I don't think they're always, it's not that I don't think they're not with me, but Dad comes to me in dreams once in a while. Well, I think Dad's helping me from the other side for sure, because people look for him and then they find me. So I think Dad and I are in the book business.
Oh, absolutely. I wanted to say to you, the impression that those of us who are not from Hollywood, the impression that we get is that the offspring of the biggest stars often have very difficult and unstable lives. They don't seem to be able to adjust to the real world very well. They don't seem to find a way to make a living that makes them relevant. And you're very different than that. You're very grounded and centered. You're focused. What do you attribute that to?
I don't know. I think that they were very practical in many ways. We were never brought up to think we were better or different. But then you realize as you grow up, your life was very different than everybody else's. But I think part of it is my metaphysical outlook, because I don't believe you lose anybody. I believe that they gave us everything they possibly could, because the first 20 years of my life was jammed with everything, travel and school and everything. And I think that was because they weren't going to be there and they wanted us to have the best they could give us while they were here. I really believe that. I've never felt a victim. A lot of people go through that. I've never felt psychologically wounded. I felt blessed and very fortunate. I wish we could have had them a little longer. I would have loved to have had Dad now when we're doing all this. But I always believe we were together again. at some point. So I don't know. I know some of them suffer a great deal from that, but I never wanted to be an actor. So it wasn't like I had to go that direction. And like I said, I knew in my teenage years I wanted to write, but then I had so many different careers. I was a display artist. I had an interior design business. I worked as a concierge for years. Again, twist of fate got me to these things. And then I did special events for the Nordstrom Company, which is very popular here. And then I started in my late 40s getting into the metaphysical more heavy, doing the readings and consultations and things like that. And then I got back into the writing. But no, I think they were pretty grounded and practical. I knew we had more than most, but I never thought that made, us different in some way. I just felt this is our life. We chose it. I believe we choose what we have. And so complaining is not going to get you anywhere. You need to make the best of what you've got.
I think you and I have something in common. You started writing, relatively later in your life, and I've started doing this relatively later in my life, and we're both loving what we do.
I always say it's never too late. It's never too late. And I love the writing. I mean, I just get so happy when I'm doing it, and I loved helping people in the metaphysical end of it. But I've been paring that down for about the last 5 years because I wanted to wait for the doorway to open up so I can retire from that and just focus on the books.
When you're writing, it's a very solitary activity, and you're such a social person. Don't you get lonely?
No. Oh, I'm never alone. I always figure I have all my guides and teachers. So it's crowded sometimes, but no, I never get lonely. I like to write, actually, me and J.K. Rowling, and that's about as close as I get to her. She wrote at a coffee shop, and I enjoy going to some place like that because I have to focus. I have to get rid of the noise. I have to focus on what I'm thinking and hearing and feeling. Can I write at home? Yes, but I'm not one of those tortured writers that has to go live in a hut on the top of a mountain and be alone to write. Because I really believe that I'm helped from the other side. I believe that it's always been like that. And then it flows. That was the best lesson I learned from my metaphysics. But no, I don't feel lonely.
So when you look at what you've written, do you sometimes get the feeling that somebody else wrote it?
When I reread it and I go back and I go, I don't remember writing that. You know how it is when you drive a car and you're driving a long distance and all of a sudden it's like you blink and you go, I don't remember I was driving for the last 30 minutes. It's kind of like that with the book. You write it, you do it, and then you go back and read it and go, gosh, did I write that? And yes, I've noticed that. So I think that's part of the help that you get.
I think you're very, very blessed because there are fiction writers who really agonize over their plots.
Yeah, they do. They suffer from it, or I don't know. I get all these ideas. They just come into my head. I mean, people go, but you've already written 3 books. And I said, yeah, and I've got 4 more lined up. I just, I've got the saga, and I've got Dad, and I've got 3 more fictional books. And I said, but I have to pace myself. I mean, I have to still make a living for a little while here until things settle up. And I thought, well, we just do one at a time. That's all you can do.
Well, Suzanne, it's been a real pleasure having you on our show and talking about your father's amazing career and your amazing life and career. Thank you so much for sharing this time with us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. I absolutely loved it. I love meeting you. And I knew when Catherine told me about you, I said, I have to do this. I also knew we would have a lot of twists and turns, which we have, but we're here. And I will keep in touch with you as my road goes along. And when I have another book or anything going on, as long as you're still doing this, I'll track you down and we can talk again.
I would love that. I hope you'll come back with every new book. And I also have a feeling you'll be coming back to talk about at least 1, if not 3 or 4 movies.
Well, cross fingers. I hope so.
Thank you again, Suzanne. Our guest has been Suzanne Brent. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thanks to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.